Welcome to Women Who Walk. I'm Louise Ross, writer and author of Women Who Walk the book, the inspiration for this podcast. And just as I did for the book, here I'll be interviewing and unpacking the journeys of impressive, intrepid women who've made multiple international moves for work, for adventure, for love, for freedom, reminding us that women can do extraordinary things. You can find a transcript with pictures to each episode and my books on my website, louiseross.com. Hello, listeners. Welcome to episode 20 of Women Who Walk. This is the first episode of 2022 and season 2. And today, my first guest of the year is Sally Cronin. Sally was born in the early 50s in South Hampshire in the UK, but from the tender age of 18 months, she began what has been a lifelong nomadic existence, living in 8 countries, including Sri Lanka, Malta, South Africa, the US, and Spain, before settling in 2016 with her husband on the southern coast of Ireland. Her work and her desire to see some of the most beautiful parts of the world has taken her to many more destinations around Europe and Canada and south to New Zealand. All those experiences and the people she met along the way provided a rich source of inspiration for her, ultimately informing her creative work of the last 20 years as a writer. After a career in customer-facing roles in the hospitality, retail, advertising and telecommunications industry, she wrote and published her first book in 1999 called Size Matters, about her weight loss journey, losing 150 pounds in 18 months. This was followed by 14 further fiction and non-fiction books, including a number of short story collections. Her first book release resulted in a radio interview in Spain that led to 4 years as a nutritional consultant for an English language station, and this was followed by 4 years with her own health show and Sunday morning show on local radio in the UK, and then as a station director, newsreader, and presenter for an online television station. Her latest release, Life is Like a Mosaic, Random Fragments in Harmony, is a collection of 50-plus images and poems on life, nature, love, delivered with a touch of humour. Via social media and her blog, Smorgasbord Blog Magazine, Sally offers other writers support, marketing and promoting their books. And on her podcast, SoundCloud Sally Cronin, she shares book reviews and short stories. Sally's husband, David Cronin, is the publisher of my 2 recent non-fiction titles, Women Who Walk, How 20 Women from 16 Countries Came to Live in Portugal, the inspiration for this podcast, and its sequel, The Winding Road to Portugal, 20 men from 11 countries share their stories. David mentioned Sally's travels, writing, and blog to me on a number of occasions, but it wasn't until December last year that I finally reached out to Sally. And so this interview is the first live conversation we've had. One small disclaimer, we had some technical issues, so we ended up using our phones for this interview. You'll notice as a result that Sally's voice sounds a bit distant. However, it went well, and so I do hope you enjoy my conversation with Sally Cronin. Welcome, Sally. Thank you for being a guest on Women Who Walk today. And now you're currently living on the southeast coast of Ireland. Can you paint a picture for us? Maybe set the scene, give listeners a sense of your surrounds and the landscape, the view from your window?
I certainly can, and thank you very much for the invitation to chat about my adventures and sometimes misadventures along the journey to arriving back here in Ireland. We're very lucky. We live on the east coast of Ireland, which doesn't tend to get the rough weather that the west coast does. It's mainly sandy beaches, fishing villages, and the larger ports such as Wexford and Waterford, their long history with the Vikings, etc.
Mm.
We live in a holiday resort
Hmm.
called Cronin,
Okay.
which has, yeah, it was a holiday resort back in the 30s and 40s. In fact, my father in law, who had a big band, would come here for the summer season
Hmm.
and stay at the hotel, which had a ballroom. So in the 30s and 40s, he was actually playing music here.
Oh, how
They played
wonderful.
jazz, and it has a long history as a place from people from Dublin would come down, and there are holiday homes and trailer parks and things in the area.
Right, right. Okay, well, thank you for setting the scene. It sounds rather lovely. Now, you were born in the UK in the early 50s, and when you were barely 2 years old, your family moved to Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, and then 6 years later, the family was living in Malta. And then in the early 60s, your father, who was in the Royal Navy, I believe, was posted to Cape Town in South Africa,
Yeah,
where you lived for a few
that's right.
years. So, what was it like for you to have these very diverse country and cultural experiences during your formative years? And do you think these experiences shaped the decisions you made as a young adult and continue to shape your life's direction?
I believe it was one big adventure as far as I can remember.
Hmm.
I was very lucky to have two older sisters, 10 and 11 years older than I was, who
Mm.
allowed me to tag along wherever they went, which meant I learned to swim at 18 months, read by the time I went to school at 4, and
Mm.
I was immaculately dressed, as my elder sister was an accomplished dressmaker and loved
Oh.
to make smocked dresses. As I grew older, I began to appreciate the more cultural aspects of the various countries we lived
Mm.
in, and that they were more than sunshine and swimming. This is particularly true of South Africa. Even though I was only 10, it was made very clear that I couldn't question the then segregation of apartheid,
Mm.
despite being guests in the country. My parents were still subject to law, despite their own personal views. And I went to a national school and learned to speak Afrikaans and
Hmm.
learned to hold my tongue. It was very hard for me not to speak my mind. We had a lovely maid called Linda Moy,
Hmm.
and my mother, I know, paid her more than the legal limit and sent her home each week for her day off with supplies. And
Mm.
she also permitted her husband to come and spend the occasional night in her quarters, which was not allowed either.
Oh, wow.
So there was some stretching of the rules.
Mm.
And she taught me Ngoza lullabies and
Mm.
reinforced for me as a 10-year-old that human kindness and love has nothing to do with the color of our skin.
Mm.
So I think from that perspective, culturally, I learned that we are all human under whatever color skin we are.
Mm. Well, what a profound experience as a young child. And then you did take that with you into your later years with a greater understanding of human nature.
Yes, I'm sure that all the changing culture and the people around me and learning new languages made me more adaptable as a
Mm.
teenager and an
Mhm.
adult. I was always comfortable meeting new people and different life experiences. It certainly gave me a self confidence that stood me in good stead in both work environment and personal relationships. And it also gave me inspiration for my stories, of course, and certainly
Yes.
provided me with more than a few character concepts along the way.
Yes. Yes. I bet. I bet many of your stories have composite characters in them from your early years.
Yes.
Mm.
And with the different environments too, it means that I can hop from one place to another. So many of my short stories, you might find one in Sri Lanka, one in Malta, one in France, or one in Spain. So yes, from that perspective, it's been great.
That's terrific that you're able to draw on all those country experiences in your stories. Mm.
I don't like waste. I don't like wasting anything, which is why I shall never retire officially. I think it's such an awful waste of people's life and experiences to not at least utilize them in some form or fashion. If you can pass them along, then perhaps somebody else might benefit from them or at least enjoy them.
Yes, actually, that was going to be one of my questions at the end about not retiring, I guess, because you aren't, but we'll get there. Um,
Yeah.
as a teen, you had a summer job cooking in a cafe, and at the time, I understand your aspiration was to go to drama school, but that was sidelined by your parents' concern that you should do something practical. Can you talk us through this period in your life and how it resulted in you running your own very successful catering business on the Isle of Wight?
It was sort of convoluted because at that time, of course, in the 60s, I had a younger brother and he was destined to go to university. In those days, of course, you needed money to go to university. And my parents were very honest with me and said, well, look, that is earmarked for him. And your two
Oh,
sisters have had great careers as secretaries. And
oh.
whilst you like singing and you like dancing, to be honest, it's a very precarious career, and it's always a good thing to have something to fall back on.
Mm-hmm.
And they were absolutely right. But I
Mm-hmm.
was brought up watching the Hollywood musicals that my mother loved
Mm.
and the westerns that were my father's favourite entertainment. And I also suspect that part of the process of getting accepted in all the different schools and cultures as a child and young teen encouraged an ability to adopt different personas. For example, after about a week, I developed a very strong South African accent at school and would then go home and speak English in front of my parents.
Mm-hmm.
And if you sound the same as everyone else, you blend in.
Mm-hmm.
And this was also the case, of course, when we returned to the UK
Yes.
and ended up in the middle of the Lancashire countryside. Within a week, I had an accent which was up north. And so, to be honest with you, I think part of the change of the different people, environments, did encourage this sort of acting ability.
Yeah, it sounds like you're a really good
Yes.
mimic.
Well, I do enjoy it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Hmm.
to get back to this
Mhm.
convoluted story, I was disappointed at 16, obviously, not to follow my dream, but I understood their concern. It was unpredictable. But I have to say that having that secretarial training to fall back on, despite me following different career trends, was absolutely a blessing in disguise. And wherever I was, I'd always sign up for secretarial jobs, and I was therefore always able to earn money. After the South Sea, where I sold souvenirs and then moved into the kitchen, I learned more than a few useful catering skills over the 3 years. I married at 20 and we moved around quite a bit because he was in the Royal Air Force. But by 24, he decided not to extend his commission. And we ended up doing a management catering course for a national steakhouse,
I see.
which were all the rage in the 70s.
Mhm.
And after that, we were assistant managers for a while, and then we were offered a public house on the Isle of Wight. I ran the catering side of the pub as my own business.
Mhm.
And during the summer months, I was preparing 100 plus lunches a day and about 50 suppers at night on my own.
Wow.
So it just goes to show that most experiences come in handy throughout your life.
Indeed, indeed. Now, this marriage breaks down, and then you move to Wales with the offer of an assistant management position at a gothic luxury hotel where you meet your second husband, David. But do tell us, what exactly is a gothic luxury hotel?
It was a turreted castle-themed building
I see.
with ornate brickwork, including arches which used the local granite, so very grey and imposing. And the inside had very high ceilings, more arches, and was designed in the mid-1850s when it was all the rage for rich landowners, or in this case, this mine owner built this place. It was very well established with regular guests, had an excellent rating. Part of my responsibility was for the dining room as assistant manager. We had a very good reputation for food and were fully booked every weekend with non-residents. And in the summer, we set up the long terrace overlooking the estuary and the mountain, and we had quite a few television and radio personalities stay with us. It was a very adventurous couple of years indeed.
It sounds like it. But continuing on with your adventure, you and David then have some in-country moves. And at one point, you're living in Hertfordshire, working for a magazine featuring Frisian dairy cattle and going to agricultural fairs, selling advertising, and on an occasion brokering bull semen. Now, there's got to be a story here.
There is, but including my father wondering who collected it, whether I had to be involved in the process. I was able to tell him no. That goes back, I guess, to the adaptability that I think I developed during my teens and childhood. At this time, David was on the fast track and his career was taking off. I was very happy to move too, as it meant new adventures. I'd find a job in the area and was happy to try anything new, even if it was signing up and doing some temp jobs for a while. I saw the advertisement for an advertising and editorial assistant and jumped at the chance. And this led to some very interesting interactions around the southwest of England, where I would have my stand in one of the dairy cows' tents between bovine prima donnas. So there'd be 4 or 5 cows in each of the show herd, and I'd have a table between them, and I would watch them having their udders talcum powdered.
God.
Back ends kept pristine before they headed into the ring. The odour was oddly comforting.
Now, why is that? Was it the talcum powder? The odor of it.
The odor of the, yeah.
I was just going to say, I feel like I'm listening to an episode of All Creatures Great and Small.
Yes, possibly. Yes, except I didn't have to put my arm anywhere, unfortunate.
That's lucky.
It was.
So you mentioned that David's career was really taking off, and then it took you to Houston, where you lived for 2 years. And I understand that not long after that, you returned to the UK from the US and you began having health issues due to your weight. Can you talk about this period and then how your health journey resulted in your first book, Size Matters?
Well, we had an amazing time in Texas, traveled all around America, as David would fly to most of the major capitals on a regular basis, and I joined him at the weekends, flying out on the cheap seats late at night. We knew we'd only be there for a couple of years and wanted to make the most of the time. I have to say, we did eat very well. Face it, portrait size was definitely more than we were used to. However, we were both very active, and I swam most days, nearly all year round, played tennis. But when we returned to the UK, it was an unsettled time. The job David came home to in his company was not as promised. Very shortly after that, his previous boss asked him to join his new startup in the London Docklands. I eventually joined the same company as a consultant to develop the customer services department, and ended up as Director of Customer Services in London and then Director of Operations in East Anglia. It was a great job. I loved it. But it was long hours, quite a bit of stress, with a good dash of internal politics, which didn't necessarily make the job any easier. I'm a stress eater. And without the safety valve of time off and exercise, the weight piled on. And by the age of 42, I weighed 330 pounds.
Oh, boy.
Along with most of the related health issues. And finally, a doctor told me that getting to 45 would be unlikely.
Oh, wow.
So finally, in 1996, David was offered a job in Brussels. We were slated to move there for a couple of years. And during that time, I decided to study medicine and nutrition and sort out my weight and health. I'm not a stupid person, but could I prevent myself from eating a couple of Mars bars a day? No. So I knew I had to do something very constructive. I had to find out why I got to where I got in this weight and health issues and resolve it. So I designed my own eating plan, and I lost 150 pounds in 18 months. Wow. Keeping a journal of my discoveries about why I had piled the weight on from a physical, mental and emotional perspective. It was very illuminating when I went back over my life. We've talked about how traveling and change developed me as a young child and as a teenager, and how it gave me self-confidence. But all that change also caused uncertainty.
Okay.
And I think one of my strategies for coping with that was to eat. Anyway, I'd lost my weight. I read my journal, and I decided that perhaps it might help other people. So I published it initially in 2001. It did very well in Ireland and UK with quite a bit of publicity nationally. And then I republished it as an ebook when we had our own publishing company in 2004 and in print. So that's how the first book came about.
I just have a side question. One of the issues that people have when they lose weight is keeping the weight off. Were you able to crack that problem?
To a larger extent, but there have been some stressful interludes along the way, particularly looking after my mother for 6 years, towards the end when she had dementia. And I worked hard to keep the weight off, and I never, ever put it back on again. So I think I got the strategy down, but I do have to keep an eye on it. One of the issues when you put on that much weight is that not only do your fat cells fill up with fat, but you increase the number of fat cells you have. So when you lose a lot of weight, you're invariably left with all these fat cells going, well, when do we get the next fill-up? And it does seem like our bodies have a natural waypoint where they consider they should be. And mine seems to be around 15 stone. So I have to watch out very, very carefully, if I start to put weight on, is to watch what I'm doing. So yes, it's not always easy to keep it off. And unfortunately, that is the case with many of the clients that I've worked with over the last 24 years.
Yeah, so that takes me to the next question then, that your book and your expertise led to you presenting health segments on an English-speaking radio station in Spain. How did that opportunity come about?
We'd returned to Ireland from Brussels, and I'd opened my own dietary advisory centre locally. And over the next 3 years, I worked with several hundred clients, either for weight loss or health issues. David went ahead to Madrid because, as you can gather, he gets headhunted quite frequently. This time, though, I said, hold on a minute, we've just bought a new house, we've got a new dog, and I've got a new business. If we leave now, we're going to lose all the money on the house. So I followed 3 years later, but his company paid for us to travel both ways. So we saw each other every 3 weeks. David would come home for 5 days, and I would go over to Spain for 5 days at a time. But it actually worked out that when I finally left 3 years later, I put the dog in the car and drove down to Madrid from Ireland. And then we lived there for 17 years.
How many?
We had the house for 17 years.
17 years. Oh, a really extended period of time.
Well, it is for us.
Yes, it is. That's what I mean.
And essentially, we had the house for 17 years, which meant we had a home. But when David left his job, he made the decision to take early retirement because it was a very high-pressure job. And I said, well, I'd rather have you at 65, but I think if you stay in that job, it's going to be much more difficult. So Trafford, who published my first book, asked me to recruit and work with English-speaking authors in Spain. And so we actually bought a place down in the south on the Costa del Sol. And during the winter, we were about 900 meters up a mountain. When it was snowing, we would head down to the Costa and stay there. We had an apartment. David started to do my formatting, but he also started doing the formatting for other authors as well. I decided to take Size Matters into the English-speaking radio station and drop it off with a note saying, I've written this book. If you feel your readers would be interested, I'd be delighted to do an interview. And as I was standing there, the program director came out rather upset because her guest, who was a well-known ballet dancer, had rung to cancel at the last minute. And she saw me and the book on the counter and asked if I would come into the studio right there and then for an interview. And I didn't leave for 4 years. I was the nutritional consultant for the morning show for 3 years. So I always say to authors, for goodness sake, drop your books off at the local radio station.
Did you have a lot of call-in guests who had questions about the health segment you're presenting on?
Yes, it was great. We did have one slight mishap because one time we needed to jazz things up a bit. So I played 2 parts on the radio at the same time. A lady called Fatima Dupree, who was a 300-pound sex therapist, who came onto the show. Well, of course, you can imagine, we got all these calls coming in.
I bet you did.
And bless her heart, she was not as political as she could have been. And so we were banned by the sister radio station further up the coast.
Well, it sounds like you also did get to go into your first love, which is the performance arts.
But we did have a lot of fun. It was great fun.
Oh, that's wonderful. So then your radio work in Spain led to TV and broadcasting work back in the UK. Is that right?
Yes. When I came back to look after my mother, first part-time and then a couple of years later full-time, I'd written another health book, which was called Just Food for Health, which is a family health manual. It covered all the major organs, the body, the systems, such as the digestive, reproductive and immune systems, along with the various health issues, and also provided the foods that supplied the nutrients that supported them. This was 360 pages, big book. So I did the usual trick. I dropped the book off at the local radio station and they rang and asked me to come in for an interview. That led to my own health show on Thursday afternoons, 2 co-presented drive times and the Sunday morning chat show. Eventually I was asked to move over to a startup online television station where I was initially a newsreader and chat show host. interviewing visiting celebrities and local politicians, including 2 astronauts from NASA, which was very exciting.
Wow.
And this led to outside broadcasts, and then I became station director for the last year. And then I ran my own production company for a year, doing documentaries and videos for university or businesses.
This is such a rich period of your life, and it seems to have come about as a result of this book, Size Matters.
Yes, again, I can't stress enough how marketing your book, especially your first book, and locally is so important. These days where we've got global network of Amazon, for example, the first thing people do is, well, put it on Amazon. Absolutely, especially if it's an ebook, you want to get the international market. But basically, if you are living in an area where you come from or live, then you will find that there is often local interest in the media about this book you've written. And it's amazing, even doing it at a local level. I did mine at a local level, but I got national recognition for that because people listen to the local media in the press and on the radio and say, oh, hang on a minute, that might be quite interesting for us. So I always advise the authors that I talk to about book marketing, I always say, if you can, focus locally, get something in the press, go on the radio, drop the book off with a note and your CV and say that you'd love to come for an interview. They're always looking for interesting guests. Have you done that with your books?
You're quite right. My ability to market the books locally has been somewhat easy. It has been easy to do in-person presentation and online presentations locally. And because there is such a huge interest, particularly in the US, from folks who want to move to Portugal, I have a pretty guaranteed audience in the US too, because they either find the book searching for books about moving to Portugal or they find it through the podcast. That's rather delightful, actually, because I do have women reaching out to me to ask me about moving to Portugal and about the book, etc. So, yes, you're quite right. Marketing locally and then taking that internationally through various platforms is a great way to market your book. Now, this is actually something that you're ultimately doing now. You're a very successful published author, 14 books, but now that you're sort of at retirement age and you're not retired, one of the things you do is give a lot of your time and energy to supporting other writers on your blog and on your podcast.
Well, I know how hard it is. I mean, when I started out, there was nothing online. It was all local or national. You had to send out press releases in snail mail. There was no access for marketing your book other than doing the legwork or sending out copies with notes and press releases to media. These days, of course, we have social media and we have blogging, we have podcasting. So it really is a book marketing dream. The only downside to it, of course, is that there are 20,000 ebooks published or uploaded to Amazon every week. So when you've got millions of books, and of course there's so many genres today, and if you're writing within a popular genre, you're likely to be one of 20,000 books going up there, or certainly several thousand within your popular genre. And it is very difficult to get your head above the parapet as far as your book is concerned. So when I set up the blog 10 years ago, it was to market my own books. But I soon realized that as I grew my Twitter, my Facebook and LinkedIn, mainly Twitter and Facebook, that it also meant that I could offer those people, those contacts to others. I wasn't interested in monetizing my blog, and it still is not monetized. I'm not an Amazon associate or anything like that. I decided that, particularly for indie authors, it was important that there was somebody in their corner. And so that's why I have evolved the blog to the point where it is today. I have taken a slight step back this year. Before the cafe and bookstore took authors, I would regularly promote them, their recent reviews, etc. Now it is the smorgasbord bookshelf, and all the books on that are ones that I can personally recommend and have reviewed. So there's still 120 odd authors in there. and I do features for them. Now, your book, for example, which I have reviewed, your books will be in the bookshelf. And then whenever I do a special feature, like the one coming up, which is share an extract from your most recent book, anybody who's on the bookshelf can send 500 words in and they will get a special feature.
Right.
Every book that is in the bookshelf, I can put my hand on my heart and say, I've read this, I enjoyed it, I can recommend it.
Yeah.
Because I discovered that people are getting leery about some of the reviews on Amazon, for example.
Yes, yes.
And so I felt that if I could say I put my name behind this, then perhaps that might add a little bit extra. It's so important to have an online presence as an author. People say, I don't really have the time to do Twitter and Facebook and all of that. Well, I made the time, and I've got around about 50,000 followers now on combined social media. And I know then that when I put my own book out, and to be honest with you, the vast majority are authors, so they're also readers. And that's the other mistake that people make. They say, I've got 50,000 followers. And I say, yeah, and how many of them are authors and readers?
That's right, yeah.
Because, you know, there's an awful lot out there who just are there to promote whatever they're doing, but it's nothing to do with reading books.
Okay.
And whilst I follow everybody I can, because as a writer, I don't say don't follow anybody except authors, because as a writer you're looking for new input, and you're looking for new characters, you're looking for new environments, you're looking for different storylines. And if you only restrict yourself to following authors, you're missing out on other people who are doing other creative work, or people who are book reviewers, or people who have colourful lives. So it is important that you have a good mix of people that you're following.
Yes.
And hopefully they follow you back.
Yes, yes. So in other words, what you're saying is you really need to be strategic about your marketing and clear who your audience is, and clear too how you can do a mutual win-win exchange of information or book sharing. You've referred to the fact that that's what we're doing. And this podcast has ended up being a wonderful platform for me to talk to other women who are writing about their adventures and their travels and so on. Probably 50% or more of the women I've interviewed have written something about their life journey, which is wonderul.
And don't you feel a satisfaction, Louise, in knowing that you're doing that?
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
it is wonderful when one of them comes to you, oh, I've sold some books from being on your podcast, or, you know, or on your blog. And that just is so satisfying.
Well, this is the nature of being an indie author. It really behooves us to be generous with our time and our sharing, because there's, as you indicated, plenty of readers out there. You just have to find them, and we can find them together. So on that note, Sally, how can listeners find you?
Right. Well, my blog is called Smorgasbord Blog Magazine because it is quite varied. And that is smorgasbordinvitation.wordpress.com. I'm on Facebook as Sally Georgina Cronin.
Okay.
And on Twitter, it's very easy, at SGC58.
Okay. Well, I will put those in the transcript to this episode, which will be on my website. And if listeners would like to reach out to you, they can find all the details on the transcript on louiseross.com. Well, thanks so much, Sally. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you for inviting me over for a chat. And thank you very much for the invitation to chat about my adventures.
Thank you for listening today. And so you don't miss future episodes with more impressive, intrepid women, do subscribe on your favourite podcast provider or on my YouTube channel, Women Who Walk Podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review Women Who Walk on either Apple or Podchaser. I've linked to them both in the transcript of this episode on my website, louiseross.com.